Hi, and welcome back to Just Ask the Question. I'm your host, Brian Karem. With me today is author and retired Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman to discuss his new book, The Folly of Realism: How the West Deceived Itself About Russia and Betrayed Ukraine. He addresses Donald Trump's approach to ending Ukraine's war with Russia and a bunch of other stuff. During the Trump administration, first Trump administration, Vindman was the director of the European Affairs of the National Security Council. He also became known as the whistleblower who raised concerns about Trump's July 2019 phone call. Oh, we all had concerns about that, my friend, with Ukrainian President Zelensky, which sparked an impeachment inquiry. So we're going to talk to him a little bit about all of that stuff today. So stick around for a few of the commercial breaks that help us pay the bills. We'll be right back. Hi, we're back. It is Just Ask the Question. I'm your host, Brian Karem. With me, as I said, author and retired Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. We're glad to welcome you back to the show. Alex, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing okay. It's been a whirlwind start to a book launch. I've been in New York for several days. I don't know, a dozen interviews. Why? For some strange little policy book about U.S. geopolitics and things of that nature, because the subtitle says it all. How the U.S. Deceived itself about Russia and betrayed Ukraine. I mean, that is playing in front of people's eyes the past several weeks, and it's going to continue to be at the top of news cycles going forward. And it couldn't be more relevant, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about how we did deceive ourselves. How did we do that?
Well, the fundamental issue we have is that we bought into Russia's exceptionalism, that they were special. In certain regards, they are. They have a massive nuclear arsenal. They're the largest country in the world by size. And then they do a very good job of kind of posturing and puffing up to make sure that we don't forget that they've got these a few assets. In reality, they don't merit that kind of attention. Their economy is tiny. They're a tenth the size of the U.S. Actually, less than that. A twelfth or more the size of smaller than the U.S., much smaller than our European allies. Their military has proven to be a bit of a paper tiger.
A bit. They had to hire North Korea. Let's see.
They had 30 plus years, six administrations, succumbing to hopes and fears, hopes that we would somehow be able to make friends with them, that we would be able to partner with them on certain things, and fears that if we didn't compromise, if we didn't appease, if we didn't cater to them, that the relationship would devolve. Strange thing is, in spite of these, playing these hopes and fears, we got to the worst, just about the worst spot anyway,
Yeah.
because we failed to live up to our own values, failed to be resolved in defending what was important to us, failed to support our allies like Ukraine. So the lesson here is don't jump at the first bright, shiny object in front of you, no matter how appealing it is. Think about what's in your long-term interest, and focus on those areas.
Well, it's hard to focus on what's important in our long-term interests when you can't see what's right in front of your face. But that's we'll get into that a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about. There are those who say talk specifically about Ukraine. You were there about what, a year and a half ago. I was there about 2 years ago. I don't plan on going back for a while because of what's going on. I know it would be difficult and problematic. But what I do know is that and I still remember the posters. I still remember the people there. I still remember being in Kiev and they're going, look, we live on this land and Russia can live beneath it. I mean, those are on bus stops everywhere. So I said then, and I'll say now, I don't think that that Putin could ever conquer Ukraine. Level like they did Gaza, but he can't conquer it.
That's true, but you know what we're trying to play for right now? What does Trump want? He wants his damn Nobel Peace Prize. He wants to be the peacemaker, and he's trying to make a play for peace. And what he's doing is actually kicking the prospect of peace down the road indefinitely. Why? Because Russia is under pressure. They don't have the staying power. They don't have the military might to destroy or occupy Ukraine. They have the ability to take small tracts of territory, losing 1,000 to 1,500 troops a day. They're relying heavily on Soviet era equipment. So the play here is what? Logically, it's to continue to pressure Russia and support Ukraine. We're doing the exact opposite. We're pressuring Ukraine, which is willing to bend over backwards to figure out a way out of this war to save its people's lives, but without compromising its sovereignty, its independence. And we're taking the foot off the neck of the Russians that are teetering. Again, exact opposite of what we think we should be doing if we want to actually bring about. So, Donald, if you want your Nobel Peace Prize, I just gave you the game plan. Why don't you go ahead and maybe adjust your approach?
Yeah, keep the foot on. Well, let's talk about that. Like I said, they had to, bring in Iran, North Korea. They can't sustain the effort. Their every indication is that they are the one teetering. And meanwhile, you do have Ukraine. Look, Ukraine. Zelensky said, "I will resign if you will admit us into NATO and stop the war now." But you have those who say, and this is, I was there. I mean, Donald Trump said this, and then he repeated this on a gaggle on Air Force One when he said Russia has all the cards, and I'm going, well, what cards do they have? He blames Ukraine for Russia invading Ukraine, and at the same time, this is all. It seems to me that the cards that are being held are by Ukraine. It's their country. They didn't do it, right?
You know, the thing is that there's something about the way Trump interacts with folks, bully type mentality. If it's a smaller state, if it's a smaller player, you basically lie, you abuse them, you extract as much as you can, you put pressure. But if it's a big player, he's think back to his days when as he was going through seven different bankruptcies. In order to get additional funds from the banks, he had to pander, he had to flatter, and these types of things. So that's the same mentality he takes with regards to geopolitics of the countries. He will throw Ukraine under the bus, thinking that they're a small player, a weak country. They're not, and will flatter Russia endlessly to potentially get his way. The Ukrainians, though, they are under enormous pressure. I mean, they're losing troops every day. They're not losing thousands of troops, but they're still losing troops, and the lives to the Ukrainians are precious. To the Russians, they're irrelevant. They're trash. Um, they're cannon fodder. So there's a mismatch there in that the Ukrainians value their soldiers' lives, their civilians' lives, and really want a way out of this, and they're willing to look at all sorts of unsavory things to try to get this done, even maybe giving up some territory in the short term, never giving up on it forever, with the expectation that they'll eventually Russia is going to collapse, or eventually maybe Russia will turn the corner or something like that, and they can get their territory back. In this kind of environment, the pressure logically should be on Russia as both the belligerent, the aggressor, but also the state that, yes, it's stronger, but it's not strong enough to achieve its military ends. It's really, frankly, too evenly matched right now for Russia to be able to achieve its ends. And the pressure is on Russia to try to figure out a way out of this war in the next several years, because it can't go on forever. Even though it considers the lives of its troops trash, it needs to continue to draw folks in, and eventually the Russian population is going to get tired. It's not just going to be the folks living in the rural communities; it's the cities that Putin relies on are going to step in and say we've had enough. So the time is not on Russian side. And again, we're looking at what's immediately in front. This idea of somehow achieving peace before inauguration on day one, immediately, and now in the next 6 months, and going about it, making this the worst mistakes that I talk about in this book of the past 30 years. It's It's shock. It's absolute folly, and I've been referring to it as the poison Kool-Aid stage of the errors that we're
Yes.
making.
Yeah, and that's a great way to put it. Here's the question of why. How long do you think we would have to continue to help Ukraine and not before Russia would experience what you're describing?
You know, I wrote an article in Foreign Affairs before the election, and I had two different scenarios: one in which Democrat wins, and one in which Trump wins. And in the Democrat scenario, where even if we were imperfect, because the administration was far from perfect in its support of Ukraine, there were lots of half measures, a dollar late, a day late, and a dollar short. But that was probably almost enough, even just maintaining that relatively modest level of support, where Russia didn't see a way out and would start to negotiate. There's a way to get there on the Trump administration if he provided robust support to Ukraine, probably within the course of a year. The Russians would have to test how much staying power they have through the summer, and then, without having any successes, and maybe with Ukraine having some military successes, they'd look for a way out. So it's doable potentially this year, but not the way we're going about it. What we're setting the conditions for is for a war through the rest of this year into next year.
So in your book, you address the situation at where do you think we went wrong in Biden? Where do you think we're going wrong?
We looked at the neighborhood. We looked at, who we thought were the dominant
Yeah.
players, and we invested all our, we put all our chips in on those relationships. Uh, Maybe it made sense all the way going back, because back then, Russia inherited the second largest arsenal in the world. Ukraine, by the way, inherited the third largest, 4,000 nuclear weapons. Maybe a reason to balance your relationships there in a robust manner. We didn't do that sufficiently. So we put our cards, or put our chips into Russia. And at a point where there was great hope that maybe the Russians could be drawn in to be a democracy. And by the time you get into the 2000s and you get this KGB thug Putin in charge, it becomes pretty clear that there's not going to be a lot of relationship building. We're not going to be friends, regardless of what George W. Bush says, looking into Putin's eyes and seeing a soul, a bunch of BS. We got played really hard. Um, and that carried forward to uh, President Obama's reset, that somehow he could come up with an idea that could normalize relationships with Russia, stabilize. Yeah, I guess it's, every administration has this hubris that they could be the ones to like fix things. But at the same time, you should be learning the lessons of the past. You should be starting to think about, okay, Ukraine just had an orange revolution, the most pro-Western leader coming into power. Why don't we not, put everything into one, all our eggs in one basket? Why don't we look to also support Ukraine? One, because they want to be a democracy, they want to join the West. Two, because Russia has already declared that they want to fold Ukraine and rebuild some empire. Why don't we like start to harden them so they don't look like such an easy target? And then you get into the later stages of Obama, and Russia does attack in a moment of Ukrainian weakness when they have another revolution to throw off a authoritarian leader that's dragging Ukraine back towards the Kremlin. And instead of making a play to warn off Russia to back Ukraine, then we basically just, kind of we send them blankets. I don't want to be too dismissive of what we did back then, but we didn't do nearly enough to support Ukraine after a war started. After a major war started, Russia seized swathes of territory. That's right. Yeah, I guess
10 years ago, the one that occurred during Obama. Yeah.
war didn't accomplish anything in ending it. So now this completely absent any history claim that like, oh, the war wouldn't have started when if he was president. The war was going on for 4 years when he was president. He didn't do anything to stop it now. He hasn't done anything yet to force a negotiation. So it's a bunch of BS, like smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, when he says that, the war never would have started if he had been, it was already ongoing when he was there the first time. That's one of the lines of BS that drive me nuts. So now here we are. We're in a position where Zelensky is now in town. Zelensky's meeting with Trump. He's declaring that we're going to get rare earths. We're holding him hostage, basically, for our support. This is him paying us back for what we've done. You say you may you may be at fault for some of that because of
And you try to turn them into something that makes sense. When I, yeah, well, there is. You could see some of that play out. It's hard because you take for every step forward, there's two steps back. With Donald. So when I was in the seat in the White House, I was looking for ways to to serve Trump's very, very transactional ideas. Like everything has to be a deal. You draw something out of every time, uh, every engagement, friend or enemy, that to your benefit. So one of the things that we had the ability to do is potentially invest in Ukraine and get things that we want also, like rare earths and commodities and things of that nature. So this is something we talked about back then. That's why, in that was the same period that he first had his eyes set on Greenland, and that all emerged out of the same thing. Like, it wasn't, this didn't just pop up out of
yeah,
nowhere. He heard something or remembers something from like years back in the most kind of bastardized form and seizes on it and tries to move forward on that. So what we have now is, the best relationships we had with Ukraine historically is when there was a value component. We want Ukraine to win. It's a democracy. It's protecting Europe. It's pushing back on Russian aggression. But there's also kind of a more a transactional interest component, which is this deal. So, this ridiculous pronouncement of the Ukrainians giving up $500 billion and then escalating that to like trillions of dollars because they wanted half of their rare earths. The policy guys got their hands on this stupid sounding idea when the Ukrainians were like, after that, we're not going to do that. They've told us F you, by the way, several times. They did that in the 90s when we told them you're giving up your nuclear weapons,
yeah,
and they're like, F you, what's in it for us? And then when we came up with something that worked a little bit better. It wasn't perfect, but it was something
right,
that got them to give up nuclear
right,
weapons. They got some investment. Now they basically said, look, we're not going to do that. It's not in our national interests. We're not going to completely compromise ourselves. So then the policy guys, the professionals get in there and they're like, okay, we actually do want Ukrainian rare earths. They have massive stockpiles of titanium. We need that for our aircraft manufacturing industry. They have other rare earths that are important for the digital age, for your iPhones, for chips for AI and stuff like that. And we want, yeah, and we want batteries. We want a reliable partner because we
Tesla.
can't trust the Chinese. They have this massive kind of almost stranglehold on rare earths. The Russians have also massive stockpiles, totally unreliable. Also, something that they've been hanging over our head, like access to titanium. We still need it, and being able to set up a deal with Ukraine that is potentially trustworthy, is reliable, is actually in our interest. So they take this $500 billion, throw that out the window, and so now Ukraine is not paying back, the support that the U.S. provided under the Biden administration. It's all prospective, looking forward. It's all about when there's a ceasefire that Ukraine will have a fund in which half of the proceeds from these mining operations goes into the kitty. The U.S. Also pitches in, and there's a joint investment, which is actually win-win because the U.S. could get access to the rare earths, and the Ukrainians get this critical investment that they need to rebuild the
Right.
country. So this is the pull. You have crazy shit happen with Trump, and then the folks that are in there, at least in the first administration, would try to take crazy shit and uncrazy it a little bit. Harder in the second administration because there's his henchmen are also wackadoos, but still, yeah.
With that thought, we're going to take a short break and we'll come back. Let's talk a little bit about Putin, Russia, and Donald Trump. Stick around. We'll be right back. Hi, we're back. It's Just Ask the Question. I'm your host, Brian Karem. With me, Alex Vindman. We've been talking about, he formerly worked for the Trump administration and has a great deal of knowledge about Ukraine, Russia, and Donald Trump. We're here talking about his new book. Alex, tell me about that before we go any further. What prompted you to write the book?
Yeah, that thing right there. So. It's interesting. I was forced out of the White House, and basically, through a campaign of uh, retaliation, my promotion to colonel was blocked, and I found my way. I couldn't really stick around in the military. Um, and the first thing I settled on was joining a doctoral program at Johns Hopkins, so like this I could continue it on. I don't want to sound elitist, but I always believed in kind of learning more about the things I invest my time in. So I wanted to do this.
Well, why the hell would that be elitist?
I don't know, because sometimes it does come across as elitist.
No, that's
But
just common. No, I mean, most people want to do that. I would think. I don't hold that against you. Come on.
yeah. So, serve your passions, right? So, I did this program and I wanted to understand, how we got to this, really horrible point where we had a war, world war, if you think about the territories involved. Russia, the largest country in the world, Ukraine, the largest country in Europe, warring in a major European war that we hadn't seen in 80 years. So I wanted to understand that. And I understood a lot of it because I served 22 years in the military. I served in Moscow. I served in Ukraine. I wrote the strategy for Russia in the Pentagon. So I had a lot of these things already in mind. And then I started to talk to, Clinton and Gore and the Ukrainian presidents and the Condoleezza Rice and all these other folks that were involved in these key moments in the relationship. And it became clear to me that the reason that we did this, that we got to this war, is that we didn't stand up for ourselves. We were very, very short-sighted, very, very transactional. So I wrote this to get my degree, my doctoral dissertation, but that wasn't enough. I thought this was an important story to tell. We were in the midst of a war, and we were headed towards a bigger war. I mean, I finished this sucker in 20. I finished the actual dissertation in December 22. We're talking about like 8 months after the start of the war. So I thought that the American public and the West should understand that we've been making mistakes repeatedly and that there are ways for us to do better so we could avoid major wars. So I rewrote the thing in a way that's completely readable. It is not too dense, it is not too wonky. I've got some cool war stories in there, tangling with the Russian security services on the border between Russia and Ukraine, them trying to knock me off and stuff like that. Some fun stuff there. And really just sharing some insights from my experience, um, to now try to see if we could counsel not just the U.S. but the West in general to change course and to focus on the things that matter to us, our alliances, our what make us strong from a security standpoint, our alliances that make us strong economically and that have enabled U.S. prosperity. Those are long-term objectives. Stability is a long-term objective that would have allowed us, that would have counseled us to not consistently bend the knee to Russia or be flexible to Russia, and focus on the things that matter. Because too often, Putin's saber rattling makes us jerk back in kind of fear. But that's intentional. He knows what he's doing. If we hold and stand our ground, it doesn't escalate us to a confrontation. Russia is not suicidal. They're not interested in that fight. They'd get their asses whooped so bad. And then if
Well, plus there's the mutual assured destruction. I mean, behind all of behind all of this between us and Russia is the threat and the specter of nuclear war. And of course Putin has threatened that on in either directly or indirectly over the years. So I mean that's where the fear comes, I would think, from the United States side is like, no, we don't want to end the world. But the fact of the matter is, it is they call it mutually assured destruction because we'd both go. So they know that, and we know that. Why are we playing that game?
it's stupid. I mean, Putin does not want to, and he enjoys visiting his billion-dollar palace in Sochi, on the Black Sea. He enjoys his planes and his yachts and all the comforts. He enjoys his many many women, and things of that nature. So he is not suicidal. He is a creature comfort type of guy. He wants to build his legacy. He wants to be seen as one of the great men in Russian history. That is not a guy that's going to, press the nuclear button. And there's definitely a way to do this where we stand our ground and warn Russia off. And we could have done that in the early days much, much easier. We could have been very conditional in the affections we showed Russia, or we could have been condemnatory when they graduated from mischief making, just troublemakers, to hybrid warfare, interfering in elections, and ultimately to military aggression. That would have been much easier. Now it's tougher. But we if we stand our ground, we recognize that he's not interested in this fight. We could still re kind of baseline, reset the table, and make sure that we move forward on the things that really matter to us long term.
Well, and we've talked about that before about what Trump said about Russia holding all the cards, because what you're pointing out is what I've said all along is Russia doesn't hold all the cards. It's blue smoke and mirrors. Trump and Putin are kind of the same ilk, bullshit artists.
Yeah, but the thing, that part of it is that this KGB guy, Putin, just knows how to play people. I mean, what as a case officer, you manage your targets, you manage your the folks that you're enticing with payoffs. You entice them with pandering to their egos. You entice them with manipulating them as useful idiots that don't know that they're getting played. And all these tools have been applied to various effect, frankly, against multiple different presidents, but most effectively, I think, against Donald Trump.
And that brings me to the point that, there are those who say that Donald Trump is a Russian asset and has been since 1987. Your thoughts on that?
I've been in government for a long time, and I know it leaks like a sieve. So, keeping secrets is not like, especially something like this. Um, so I say that, to be run like a traditional asset doesn't make a lot of sense. It's easier to manipulate him because of his ego and just flattery and stuff like that. But this week, I'm starting to have my doubts. This vote in the United Nations, where we sided with North Korea, we sided with Russia, we sided against our allies. We called out Ukraine and Zelensky as a dictator. To what end? It doesn't advance the cause of peace. This is not something that's going to bring about the war. There is nothing in it for Trump to go in so hard for Putin. So the question is, why is he doing it? What is his motivation? Now, I don't believe this is true, but you have something from the former head of the FSB, the KGB
Right.
of Russia, this Nikolai Patrushev guy, who's the head of the National Security Council. I sat across from the table from him many times. Um, he basically said that, and I tweeted about this. He said that. Um, Trump owes us. We got him elected, and now he has some obligations. I think that's just him just throwing hand grenades and trying
Right.
to divide people and add to the conspiracy theories. But again, why is Trump going in so hard? He wants to be the winner. He wants to be the peacemaker. He is not serving his own interests here. That might happen pretty often because he's just ham-handed, but this one is so extreme that it just, I don't know. I don't know what to make of it.
Well, and the people around him aren't any brighter than he is. I mean, Pete Hegseth, for the love of God, running the Department of Defense. I don't see how. I mean, you tell me. But my experience is that he's A, not that bright, and B, he's compromised. If anybody is.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'd say that there's a battle royale going on inside the administration. There are not the adults in the room that there were the first time around. The skilled, experienced, conservative cabinet secretaries and their staffs. Now you have a lot more henchmen, but there are still some, and frankly, I almost loathe to do this because I feel like I'm praising the Marco Rubios and the Mike Waltzes, who I've criticized aggressively, and I think they're jerks, and they get policy wrong pretty regularly. But these guys are still somewhat practiced on national security, and they do believe in advancing U.S. national security. I don't know if they believe that more than serving their own personal interests and elevating themselves, but they do. And you could see the battle going on inside the White House, inside the administration, between these pronouncements that the president's making, and then 24 hours later changing course. Like he three times or four times over the course of the past 2 weeks has said one thing and then 24 hours later backtracked. Said one
On
thing and backtracked.
Yeah, he came out yesterday and he said, "What? I never said that about Zelensky. I never said he was a dictator."
This happens all the time. It happened all the time the first time, but it was mainly behind closed doors. This time it's all out in the open, and you could see this that these folks are saying, "Mr. President, we're on board, all in for you, high fives, but can you maybe, you might want to do this because this is going to help you get that peace deal and your Nobel Peace Prize." Talking to him in like with kid gloves and stuff like that, like he's a 3-year-old. To wheel him back. Because then, today, maybe in the meeting with Zelensky, he's going to say, "Hey, you're a dictator," and then in the afternoon, he'll be like, "Oh, I was just joking with him. I was just getting ribbing him or something like that." That's just the way it's going to be.
So, and unfortunately, you're correct. So let me ask you this: we are on day 40 of the new Donald Trump regime, I mean administration, and so where do you see this? At the end of 100 days, where do you think we are?
I think that this breakneck speed of shock and awe, just smashing glass, is going to end up slowing down. I think the fact is that we he
Well, yeah, there won't be any glass left to smash. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think that's true to a certain extent. But I think what's going to end up happening is that this is now shifting to the courts to adjudicate, the illegality of the various moves. The question becomes, by the time we get to day 100, is what is the implementing branch? We call it the executive branch, but what does the implementing branch of government do when the courts order them to stop their illegal, activities? Do they just dismiss it? Does that create a constitutional crisis? That's when it gets really, really dangerous. But I think the fact is that, flat out destroying agencies, that's going to start to, folks understand that playbook. The poor guys at USAID, the sweetest, nicest people, these are like the bleeding hearts. These are the folks that were like, these are like, I don't care about the paycheck. All I want to do is help people. They're literally like, the it makes me sick because these are the folks that have nothing but the best intentions. They're being maligned, they're being called like, a spot, whatever. That's not true. These are good people, and they weren't ready for it. It's unfortunate that it fell on on that one agency because they were like, sure, we're gonna try. It's the new president. We're gonna let him in, and computers get shut out. Security comes in, kicks everybody out of the building. Everybody else is kind of now starting to be thoughtful about the playbook, and it's not going to unfold that quickly, and it's going to get tied down in the courts. But it was a lot of shock and awe in the opening, week or two. That's probably going to start to grind down in the courts. Maybe the legislative branch also starts to play a bigger role because you now have conversations about debt ceilings and budgets that are going to require some level of bipartisan support. The firing in the Pentagon of folks that now need to be Senate confirmed kicks this back into the Senate, where the Democrats don't have to say simple I, up or down votes on these generals. Each one of them could get a hearing. You start to grind down this mischief making machine, and buy yourself some time and let things play out. Like the price of eggs going up, inflation picking up steam, prices you know, uh, um, starting to explode in certain areas. People dying of measles. The safety nets for our most vulnerable being stripped away in Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security cuts. And we get deeper into this year, and then the politics start to weigh down on the administration and the Republicans, and then we start to get some accountability in.
Yeah, well, that sounds like what you are outlining sounds probable, but it also sounds very painful for the United States. Internationally, USAID, that's a good point. They've been sullied their reputation by Donald Trump, but the fact of the matter is, the work that they do. By the way, you tell me, you know better than I do. If we don't do that work, who's going to do it? Well, it's going to be Russia and China, and it builds goodwill. I mean, China has its own program. So I mean, this decision doesn't just affect us here in the United States and the loss of jobs, but it affects our reputation across the world. Yeah, I don't think, and I mean, yeah, I don't think it's ever been more dangerous to be a U.S. citizen anywhere in the world because of Donald Trump. You
I
tell me.
think that's true. I would say that the immediate effects are just, misery and suffering, lives lost. These are the most vulnerable. These are food programs to places on the edge of starvation. These are places that rely on, malaria treatments or, HIV treatments that these people are not going to survive.
Yeah,
We will have
that's
lots of deaths and lots of misery as a result of this horrible, callous decision. And I don't give a fuck who you are as an American. You if you're staring into the eyes of children, um, there's very few Americans that wouldn't do something to pitch in and help. And right now, it's a far-flung notion. You're not seeing it, but I don't even MAGA would probably stop and provide aid. And that's what we were doing with some of these programs. So eventually, it does mean that you have the Chinese come in, but they're going to be there to extract those rare earths that are important to us. Get a corner of the market there to get to ports that are going to threaten our security. Russians don't can't afford it, but maybe they could do some things in that regard. I guess the bottom line is that our adversaries are going to fill some strategic vacuums, but in general, there's going to be a lots of misery, and it's going to put our folks in danger. It's not just the loss of a soft power or influence, that we're tarnishing America's good name. It's also the fact that these are, think about them as forward posts to be aware of the spread of Ebola or some other, horrible disease that we would get through these different programs in no places in Africa that nobody wants to go except for these wonderful U.S. aid workers that are willing to put themselves at risk. Now we don't have those sentries, and it does probably put our folks here, even in the United States, in danger. It is one of the stupidest decisions we made, in a long time.
yeah. We're talking with author and retired Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman about his new book, The Folly of Realism: How the West Deceived Itself About Russia and Betrayed Ukraine. And Alex, I guess I, I guess going from there, it is a stupid decision. And so I asked at the end of 100 days where you thought we would be. Where do you think we'll be at? I mean, with all the stupid decisions that have been made, do you still have hope for the future for the United States?
Yeah. So I think, I probably defer to some folks that like are even more studious on the topic of authoritarianism. There's a guy that at one of these elite universities that Stephen Levitsky that writes about the slide towards authoritarianism. And he says that we're headed towards competitive authoritarianism. Sounds fancy. It's basically like dictatorships that still conduct elections because they want to show that they're still they have enjoy popular support. So what that means is that you still have elections, but they're favoring the party in power. That means you have to win bigger in order to get those reversed. And I think the fact is that we can easily do that. Why? Because this last go around, 75 million Americans voted for Trump. That is 25% of the population, less than 25% of the population. The other 25% of the population voted for the Democrats, and about 50% didn't participate. So when these folks that are not paying attention are now starting to see it in their pocketbooks wake up, there is an opportunity for massive people power. And my expectation is that we'll see some of that unfold maybe in 2025, maybe. I think it's too early, but we might see it in like Virginia where there's a gubernatorial election. We do, Virginia, I just left Virginia. We do some crazy shit there, completely off
Yeah.
cycle, seemingly irrelevant, but it tells you how things are going to play out the next year.
Yeah.
And I think we might see it, and we might see the Dems win in a big way there. 2026, the House very, very likely, or at least a clear path. The Senate seems out of reach, but this is the recipe for like what we call black swan, things that are just way outside the norm to unfold. And I think there's a potential for dark horse candidates to maybe win, and maybe there's an opportunity to even win back the Senate. Not in places that you would expect, but good candidates running in places where people are being very much affected by Trump's bad policies, wake up and start to pitch in. So that helps us if we win back the House in a big way, if we win back the House and Senate in a huge way. And then we're looking at, 2028, where it could be a unique opportunity in that the extreme positions of the Trump administration just breaking so much, eliminating so many safety nets, gives us a unique opportunity to swing in a direction that is not so pro billionaire, that supports, working Americans, really the rest of us, and does things that seemingly were impossible. Maybe like comprehensive immigration reform, maybe like approaching universal healthcare. Things that, like, the ultra rich don't want to spend money on because they don't need it, but that could really, really help the vast majority of Americans that are working hard but still not, being able to get ahead. So I think there are opportunities, or at least paths that allow us to get save ourselves.
Well, you point out something that I've said often. I think that it. I don't may not like the way you voted, but I'll congratulate the fact that you voted. There seems to be Donald Trump talks a lot about the the silent majority, a term he stole from Richard Nixon, but along with a lot of other things he stole from Richard Nixon and from the rest of the world. His part and parcel is to thieve, but nonetheless, that being said, the real silent majority in our country are those who do not vote. As you pointed out, he represents a super minority, and they will vote. They do go out and vote, most people don't. And that when you have only 60%, we consider that a great turnout in this country. If we get 60% of the voters, that means all it takes is 30% plus one, and that's a minority. That means 70% of the people didn't get served. So I agree with you there. My question then, and I want to thank you for being here today. I could do this conversation for a long time because it just fascinates me. But as we close it out, what do you think has to happen? Does it have to get worse, or do you think that people are actually going to listen this time and go to the ballot box?
Well, I unfortunately, it's going to get worse. It has to get worse because we chose Donald Trump to be the president again, knowing that he was going to implement, this Project 2025, cause a massive amount of damage. So it has to get worse, unfortunately, and it's going to get worse for the folks that could least afford it. And then that's going to probably cause folks to wake up. I think there's only so much juice you could squeeze out of the fact that it was the other guys that were causing the problems. You could do that when you're out of government, but it's a harder story to tell if you control the House, the Senate, and the presidency.
And the
That's
Supreme Court.
and this so that's a harder story to tell. So I think there's definitely a clear path forward. I find it that we're in a moment of, a really oppressive, bleak moment, but there is an opportunity for, to cast a vision that allows this country to continue in this arc that we've had across the centuries, bending toward justice, bending towards serving more people. We took a huge step back, and it's really, really bleak at the moment. But I think we could bend back in the general trajectory of the country. I try to do that when I talk to folks, from my perspective. This book that I wrote, and I'm, you know, be doing the hard sell on, because I think it offers not just a diagnosis of where we went wrong, but it also a vision of where we could do better going forward. It's fundamentally, the argument I make is for U.S. moral leadership going forward. It's an argument where values are central to our interests. I accept that as a way to navigate around these short-sighted mistakes that we make. And I want to get that story out because when the time comes to reject Trumpism, there's an opportunity to embrace something that, tries to make this country better. And I'm trying to be helpful in that conversation.
Good Christian values. By God, that's what he's for.
Right, right, right. I wonder. I'm guessing that. I'm guessing that. He should be struck by. He's probably been struck by lightning a bunch of times.
Yeah, well, that would explain the hair. So let's. So the name of the book is "The Folly of Realism: How the West Deceived Itself About Russia and Betrayed Ukraine." Where can we find it?
It is at Amazon, if you're still doing that with Jeff Bezos there. Your local bookstores. You can find me at Substack at avindman.com. I put quite a bit of information out there, or on my socials, but it's basically everywhere. And I appreciate the support. It's doing well. I'm pretty optimistic that we're going to hit some markers here, and go out there and let me know what you think. Leave a review.
Yeah, and the name of all right. So on Substack again, where can we find you on Substack?
A Vindman, so first initial Alex Vindman.com, avindman.com.
Okay, and the name of this show is called "Just Ask the Question." I'm your host Brian Karem. I want to thank you, Alex, for being here again, and all the best to you, man. You're you're one of the good guys, and we got to support you. So I appreciate you being here. All righty.
Looking forward to next time.
Yep, sounds good. All right. That once again, thanks guys for joining us. We'll catch you all next time.